Anyone who's interested in making change in the world also has to learn how to take care of herself, himself, their selves. For a long time, activists did not necessarily think that it mattered to take care of themselves in terms of what they eat, in terms of mental self-care, corporal self-care, spiritual self-care. I know that there were some people who emphasized it. I'm thinking about one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party, Erica Huggins, who began to practice yoga and meditation in the 70s. And she encouraged many people, including Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, to join that practice. I think they did a little bit of it, but I think our movement would have been very different had we understood the importance of that kind of self-care. Personally, I started practicing yoga and meditation when I was in jail, but it was more of an individual practice. Later, I had to recognize the importance of emphasizing the collective character of that work on the self. Well, it means that we're able to bring our entire selves into the movement. It means that we incorporate into our work as activists ways of acknowledging and hopefully also moving beyond trauma. It means a holistic approach, I think.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's bonus show. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller, Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, a film the Kremlin doesn't want you to see, so be sure to watch it. Our opening clip was Angela Davis being interviewed by Afropunk about the importance of self-care for building collective action. So in this week's episode, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to share a self-care diary with you because I had a bit of a confrontation with myself recently. And if I'm feeling this way, if I'm discovering my own coping strategies for this 2024 election and the increasingly grim news in the world as we are in this global struggle between fascism versus fraying democracy. I'm sure others out there may have coping strategies they may not even be aware of that they're going through. So I'll just chat a little bit about that. To our wonderful supporters at the truth teller level or higher on Patreon that make our show possible, you're going to hear Ari Berman of Mother Jones, the author of the new must-read book on how to save our democracy. It's called Minority Rule, the right-wing attack on the will of the people and the fight to resist it. Ari Berman is an essential voice who has been covering the libertarian, Republican, Russian-backed, far-right, Christian nationalist, consistent, determined, overwhelming chipping away at our democracy for years. He meticulously reports on the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act, how Republican hostage states, so-called red states, steamroll over laws in their own constitution, and so on and so on the list goes. Ari Berman is one of the angels out there in the coalition to protect what's left of our human rights here at home. And his book is just a real-life Stephen King novel of horror, Minority Rule. I strongly urge you to read it to get your grounding and to fact check all the gaslighting out there. So Ari takes the Gaslit Nation self-care challenge. He goes through the list of questions with me, and it's some surprising answers there from both of us because I started, chiming in, inspired by what he's saying. So to our wonderful Patreon community, that conversation is for you. And to those who want to join our community, get access to our big old general group chat called the Victory Chat, as well as our artist chat called Art is Survival. And you can submit questions to our regular Q&As. You can join a group of like-minded listeners from around the world who are all linked arms and getting each other through another make it or break it election year, because that is what we have to do. We absolutely have no choice. But it'd be great if Biden and his team could be a little bit more cooperative in helping us get through it for all sorts of reasons, as I've talked about in recent episodes, and you'll hear in next week's show with two experts who have been key to some very big elections in recent years, and they know the ins and outs of the Washington, D.C. establishment, and you'll hear from them in that really interesting conversation that looks not only at the 2024 U.S. election and how Biden can still pull this out and win. There's still time. There's still time to correct course, because there's a lot of lost opportunity that's been going on lately. And you'll hear about that next week, as well as my esteemed guest's insights into the transnational crime syndicate operating in America's backyard. I will save that surprise episode for you. It is a meaty one with a lot of key issues to U.S. national security and our election that need to be on your radar. I look forward to bring that to you next week. I know I'm being suspenseful, but it's all intentional because I want to get ahead of myself, because it's a really meaty episode. There's a lot I want to share with you on this whole issue of self-care. So you'll hear that episode out on Tuesday. And just to give you a little teaser, it's called What Do the Russians Want with Puerto Rico? Yep. Puerto Rico and Russia. More on that next Tuesday. And now, if you want to hear this full bonus show featuring Ari Berman of Mother Jones, author of the new book, Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It, make sure to subscribe to the show on patreon.com/gaslit at the truth teller level or higher. That's patreon.com/gaslit. And I want to share with you, as I promised at the top of this episode, my little self-care diary. It's been a hellish time. As I've mentioned before, I had a loved one who was in and out of the hospital, struggling a lot. My sort of personal struggles, my personal grief was compounded, of course, by the collective grief we're all bombarded with currently, obviously. And so reporting twice a week, with the two shows I put out every week for several months in this horrible, time of genocide. It was just a really, really rough 2023 and heading into 2024. And I know I'm not alone in that. And so one way I've been coping is I've been taking lots of trips, and just almost like running away from it all. It's very hard to take lots of trips, especially when you have two little kids, but it's been something that has helped me tremendously into just changing my environment, getting exposed to new things. Seeing old friends especially has been a godsend for me in these past few months. Rekindling old relationships from college has been just my lifeblood and bringing my energy back and healing. So I hope whoever you are listening to this, I would love, love, love if you could just think of an old friend that's been on your mind that you'd love to hear the voice of, and just give it a try, even if it's been too long of a time, because it's amazing how much the essence of the person is still there, and how the two of you together just pick up from where you left off. And it's just such a comfy old blanket to be wrapped up in. And that's been my therapy. So my self-care has been travel to see old friends, and it's really put the wind back in my sails. And this past weekend, I went to UC Davis, where I went to college, and I celebrated my 20-year college anniversary, and from when we graduated in 2004. And that was a time when the frog was already boiling in the pot of fascism. We were stuck under George W. Bush and his invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, which unleashed the horsemen of the apocalypse, the rise of ISIS, and so on and so on. You've heard me talk about it many times in the show. Sort of a lot was unleashed under Bush that we've been living under the fallout of for so long. Then Trump just compounded that. And so that was an exciting time, being back at UC Davis, seeing all these old friends. There's about a dozen of us who came together, a lot of it last minute. I joined very last minute, spontaneous. God bless my husband for holding it down at home and watching the kids. God bless him, because I had a whirlwind of an unforgettable time at UC Davis. It is such a beautiful campus. It is an international campus with students from all over the world. UC Davis is a leader in sustainability, is a leader in scientific research. It's even a leader in the arts, diversity, and empowerment programs for women and social mobility, and so on and so on. So if you are somebody who's considering college or, have a kid nearing college age, definitely put UC Davis on your list to check out. I had such a glorious time there, and the whole city has changed so much since I went there. Back in 2004, we had like three bars to go to. Now the place is a wonderland of restaurants, cute little coffee shops. They even have a Pirates of the Caribbean tiki lounge, which had like giant octopus legs coming out of the ceiling. It was just like the weirdest thing. I thought I was in a fever dream of tiki wonder. So definitely put Davis, California on your bucket list. It's in Northern California. It's worth the stop. It's worth renting a bike for a day and cruising around. The place smells like flowers. Everything is in bloom. I had a glorious, glorious time. And I love you, Davis, so much forever and ever. One memory that has come back to me from my time at UC Davis was when I used to be the director of entertainment for the campus, where I'd book bands. I booked all sorts of bands, like The Roots, Sum 41, Henry Rollins. There was the Pixies, the Decemberists, Plain White Tees, if I recall. I'm going off of memory. The Far Side, Ozo Motley, Black Alicious, a long list of bands that I booked, and I don't even remember them all, so I'm sorry if I'm leaving anybody out. But I had a grand old time booking entertainment for the school. And I remember some young college Republicans led a sit-in. All two of them on the UC Davis campus led a sit-in, I believe, in the president's office, in administrative office. So the Republican kids on campus were furious at the school for not having any conservative speakers on campus. Sure, we brought Michael Moore, Bill Clinton, Maya Angelou, a long list of people, but there weren't enough right-wing talk show hosts coming to UC Davis at that time. So they let us sit in. And their protest was heard, and it fell to me to book a Republican speaker for them, which I was happy to do. I mean, sure, I will use my budget money to bring a Republican here to speak, my limited budget money, because these bands that students actually went to listen to are expensive and their agents really squeeze us for every dollar we have. But sure, I'll make some room in my already tight budget to bring a Republican speaker for you as a goodwill gesture to bring peace on campus. Sure, I was happy to do that. And the request they had was for Ben Stein, who is a conservative economist. He's kind of obnoxious. He has a nasally voice. He had some show back in the day called Ben Stein's Money. I think he kept a column at the Journal or some other sort of more Republican outlet. And so I made an offer to Ben Stein to come talk. I think I offered him like 10 grand and travel or something along those lines. Certainly something that was on par with what I would offer someone similar to him in fame, let's say. Like, he wasn't a superstar. He was somebody that, I offered him what I would offer anybody sort of his stature on the right or the left. It didn't matter. And sure enough, he turned it down. He's trying to haggle the price with me, and I just didn't have the money. He didn't really try to counter. He just wasn't interested. I guess it wasn't enough for him to fly to California, in a beautiful city, and talk to a handful of Republican kids desperate to see him and get some solidarity on campus. And I thought that was a hilarious punctuation to their effort. Here you had these Republican kids going out of their way, demanding a Republican speaker, being all passionate and idealistic about it. And the Republican speaker, true to Republican values, was too greedy to basically be there for them. And I was like, wow, what a Republican story that was. Very true to their culture. And I had to tell these Republican students, who were actually quite nice, they're in my office, they're quite nice, and we were friendly. I'm like, sorry, I couldn't make it work. And you could say, well, why didn't I try with others? Because I was busy. We were busy doing all sorts of things. I don't know if they ultimately got their speaker from some other department, but certainly not mine. And that money went to getting entertainment acts that the students actually wanted to see and that would sell out the auditorium. So there you have it. And I was reminded of all that, not just being back at campus this past weekend, but also seeing all the right-wingers screaming at the growing protests across college campuses in the US right now, demanding an end to Israel's genocide against Palestinians. And you have kids just linked arms sitting there. And yet you have several of them, including faculty showing solidarity for them, being suspended, being in some cases arrested. You have a fence that was put up on NYU campus to block off an area where they gather, which is pretty authoritarian. That's the kind of stuff that George W. Bush would do during his time to clamp down against anti-war protesters. That's the kind of thing that Yanukovych would try to do to clamp down on protests against him. So I just want to remind everyone, the Tom Cottons out there. Remember Tom Cotton famously in 2020 had that op-ed piece in the New York Times with a headline like, "Send in the troops, send in the National Guard to clamp down against the George Floyd protests." This is America. We're giving millions in aid to countries like Ukraine that are fighting to live in a democracy where they can have free speech, where they can protest, where they can run for office, where they can have marriage equality and so on, where they can have democratic progress. So we are trying to win a global war against fascism. So part of that has to be tolerance. Part of that has to be respect for civil disobedience that has won hard-fought progress in this country. Or else what are we standing for? So I understand that under all sorts of administrations in recent years, there's been what has been said versus what has been done, and listen to what is done. And right now, the Biden administration, and it's okay that we call them out. It's actually important if we call them out. I know we're going to have a very close election this year, but we're all going to be there and show up for each other because this election is bigger than Biden. This election is bigger than Biden. We have important key state races. We have Congress, the power of Congress, which can make or break victory for Ukraine, as we saw with Mike Johnson and MAGA deliberately holding up aid for Ukraine for 6 critical months. So this election is bigger than Biden. And it is imperative that we call out Biden when we need to, because if we don't, his power goes unchecked. And unchecked, unscrutinized power is dangerous to all of us. If we just rah-rah cheerlead like some tribal Democrats in some sorority or whatever, and just be mindless in our support for Biden right now and not hold up any scrutiny to where they fall short for our values of what we strive to be, what we strive to represent as Americans, that is dangerous for all of us. So anybody who's sleepwalking into this election, thinking they have to just read from a script, they have to toe the party line, you can do both things. You can fight fascism and you can hold the powers to account, to live up the values they claim to hold. It is imperative that you do so because otherwise you have unchecked power, and that's dangerous for all. So why am I calling out Biden now when it's also the right wing that is calling on the National Guard to come in to clamp down on these protests and so on? Because if the Biden administration, which holds the power right now, did more to hold Netanyahu in check, did more to pressure the opposition around him, just like Biden as vice president pressured Ukraine to clean up its act, clean up its corruption, even, removing specific officials from power, Biden could change course on foreign policy. Biden could go above and beyond for Palestinians, and he's done so far. For instance, Biden could allow, yes, that largely symbolic vote for Palestinian statehood in the United Nations. He could do those things. Biden's Secretary of State, Blinken, could trigger more enactment of the Leahy measure to ensure that more and more IDF units accused of war crimes, and there's plenty of documentation for that, don't receive any funding from the U.S. or have limits on their fundings. Far more Israeli terrorists can be sanctioned. There's so much more that could be done by the Biden administration to enforce accountability that ensures a permanent ceasefire. And if that happens, you're going to see less protests across campus. But until that happens, expect these protests to grow, especially when there's police and other authoritarian measures taken to disperse them, like all sorts of intimidation tactics to disperse them. The more you aggressively clamp down on these protests, the greater the sympathy for them grows and the greater the protests grow. Okay? So 2 things need to happen. Number 1, the demands need to be met that a permanent ceasefire is enacted and that all the war criminals, Netanyahu included, are brought to account, and that more is done to pressure Israel to call new elections, okay? And if you don't do that, what faith do we have that this administration or any future administration will do anything to hold Russian war criminals accountable if we can't hold our allies accountable, okay? The other thing that needs to happen is there needs to be greater tolerance and understanding and support for these students who are holding it down morally for all of us in America. They're doing the right thing and they're on the right side of history. And I just feel very proud of everybody who's risking a lot to do it. It needs to be done. It's essential. All right. So I'm going to end it there because I need to. And to all my listeners who may have any sort of personal history connection for Israel, you listen to the show for a reason, because it's a show against authoritarianism. It's a show against transnational crime. Netanyahu and his government of the last 2 decades is an important node in transnational crime. We've covered that on many recent episodes. We're going to talk about it in a future episode soon, doing a whole big explainer piece on that so people understand that ending this war, ending the genocide, ending the cycles of violence, establishing a peaceful two-state solution, getting rid of this Netanyahu and making it impossible for any other Netanyahus to come to power again is in the interest of every single person that loves Israel, that feels any historical, cultural connection to Israel. If you're anti-Trump, you have to be anti the current government of Israel because it's the same fascist force. All right. Now, for something different, we're going to now transition to self-care, a self-care conversation, this one featuring journalist Ari Berman of Mother Jones. Everyone out there listening, enjoy this spring. Hopefully you have some spring weather wherever you are. Enjoy this time of renewal in the world, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere. Enjoy it because this is the time to get your self-care in. This is the time to recharge your batteries because as summer comes to a close, it's going to be a time of intensity I don't think we've seen since 2020. They're going to try everything to steal this election, and they're going to have Russia's help, and they're going to have China and Iran's help as well, because the authoritarian regimes want chaos. They want America to destroy itself, and Trump is a weapon for that. That's why they're backing him. Yes, even China. It's in China's interest for a weakened and corrupt U.S. So without further ado, here is journalist Ari Berman of Mother Jones taking the Gaslit Nation Self-Care Q&A. Be sure to check out his book, Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It. To hear this full episode, get all Gaslit Nation episodes ad-free, all our bonus shows, submit questions to our regular Q&As, get invites to exclusive virtual events, and more. Be sure to subscribe to the show at the truth teller level or higher on patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.